Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today, once again, is Mike Antonacci. Mike actually joined me on more than one episode prior to this one, but this one's actually intended to be picking up the thread and continuing the conversation of chronic illness and support raising. So there would have been a previous episode about this in the past. I don't know that it was necessarily last week, but you might want to go back and listen to that one first. That one was entitled, "You Are Not Alone in This." But today's focus is more on like how to adapt. And so first of all, Mike, for people that might not want to go back and listen to that one, catch people up to speed, first of all, just a little bit about who you are and where you live and a little bit about your illness. So first of all, welcome, my friend. And yeah, go ahead and jump in.
It's good to be back. Yeah, so my name's Mike Antonacci. I work for a college ministry organization called FOCUS, and I teach and coach people as they raise support, and of course, raise support myself in the midst of all of that. This is my 10th year with FOCUS, and I live in the Denver metro. And about 5 years ago, feet started hurting, and we slowly added body parts that started hurting, which is I now know is consistent with autoimmune conditions. My immune system attacks my super tiny nerves, and I'm sure you can imagine they do not enjoy that. So on a functional level, I'm limited in how much I can sit, stand, and use my hands each hour, and so spend most of my time laying down with my computer suspended above me, which I think is an awesome setup, but also it took a while to figure this out. And I think that's just an example of how can you adapt to do your job in a way that most people wouldn't. Most people don't have to do this. They probably wouldn't want to. I don't remember if it was you or one of the other SRS teachers asked me when I was laying on a couch, like, how do you not fall asleep all the time when you do this?
That was Jeremy Henderson. Yep. Because I think I kind of cringed when he asked that question, but also I was like, okay, that's a fair question.
Yep. And the answer is sometimes with great difficulty, but eventually you just get used to it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I appreciate you being here again, and I appreciate your friendship and your sweet spirit. And talking about reasonable accommodation is one way to say it. Reasonable, just kind of thinking through that. How do you do your work? How do you adapt? Really, how do you adapt in being a person that is very much called by God to do a ministry that he is using to build his kingdom? Praise the Lord for that. But then also with a chronic illness, Mike, you've had some adaptations that you've had to make for you to do your job. You just mentioned one, but let's dig into that a little bit more. And if there's time, I'll even share with some of the adaptations that we have made with my wife, Marky, and her health, and some of the ways that she's still been able to very much contribute to the ministry that we get to do with Exago, and of course in partnership with SRS, but is not necessarily what everybody might think about and fantasize about as they're thinking about full-time ministry. So, but let's start with you. So dig into that a little bit for us. Tell us about this whole adaptation idea.
I think I was first introduced to just for normal everyday life things. So feet first started hurting. That was the first part. And I'm like, oh no, how do I cook? Because most of the time you do your cooking standing up in the kitchen. Like, well, there's no rule that says you have to do it that way. So what if I just bring the cutting board to the kitchen table and chop things there and then go stick it on the stove? That's a very simple change, but it was kind of mind-blowing when I realized that I could do that. Or the day that I figured out I can open the handle to the fridge using both hands. And I didn't have to do it with one. So I think part of it for me was giving myself the permission to do things differently and accomplish the same goal. Because that's what this is about. It's not about getting out of doing things. It's about how do you do the same result, but in a different way. So one we were talking about a little bit earlier was when I'm making my support raising calls, dialing the phone to get an appointment, I can't hold my phone up to my ear for very long. So I have a headset. Right. And I really like the headset. It's awesome. So simple adaptations, most adaptations are going to be cheap or free, or you can do with stuff lying around. And I would always recommend try those first to see what works and what doesn't. There also are great things out there you can get. I paid for voice software to control my computer. That
Mm,
was very worth the money.
yeah.
Very, very worth it.
Yeah. And let me just kind of pause you right there because I know sometimes missionary community, hey guys, I love you so much. Also, if we're just honest, across the board, most of us missionary types, we tend to accidentally be a little bit more budget driven than vision driven. And the reality in this case is I just want to affirm what Mike is saying that he spent money where necessary. Like he tried to find the affordable way first, but where necessary, he spent the money to get the right setup, to get the right headphones, to get the right computer monitor. I'm assuming there's a stand in there. I know I've seen that you have to use some certain types of like body specific pads for when you
Mm-hmm.
like lay down for when you're working. Like they don't give all that stuff away, do they, Mike?
That is correct. Yeah,
But you
and
need it. You need it to do your job well. There's no sense in you laying there in more pain than you're already in, instead of spending the $50 or $200 or whatever it is to help you thrive in your work role.
one, if you put it in that context, like you've probably seen my pen grip, it was $15. Would I pay $15 so that I can write and not have my hand be in pain? Absolutely. That's an easy trade when you put it like that. But
Right.
until you frame it correctly, it's like, oh, maybe I can just tough it out. That's if it's a chronic illness, toughing it out is the wrong answer. If it's more of a transient thing, like talk to your doctor about that. But yeah, think of the quality of life improvement it will have. Is that worth it? Probably.
Yeah.
My boss is really good at. We've brainstormed. Like one of them, he said, "Okay, the worst part of my voice software is moving the mouse. It's pretty clunky. I don't like it, but I don't have a better solution." So he was looking. There's joysticks you can control with your tongue to do mouse things. They're just not very good, and they're like $1,500. So if it wouldn't help much and cost that much, not doing it. But my voice software was under $200.
Hmm.
Absolutely 100% worth it.
Yeah. And so for those people that are listening, first of all, we hope you've been through a support raising solutions boot camp. We think that is the best training in the world. We know there's other trainings out there. We're not putting anybody else down. We think that's the best training in the world when it comes to support raising. And one of the ideas that's talked about at length in that training is budget driven versus vision driven. And we always come up with examples of where people are being budget driven versus vision driven. And it's kind of like one of the ones that we often talk about is, okay, let's say that you're in graphic design, you need a real computer, like not just, the thing you can get at Black Friday sale that Best Buy is trying to get rid of at the last second. And it's a computer, but it's coming with a lot of not so great software pre-installed. And yeah, just not good. But you need a real computer that's really has the capacity to handle graphics and stuff like that. You're going to spend thousands of dollars. If you're budget driven, you just go buy that cheap computer, but then you might spend a lot of time and a lot of hassle and a lot of headache working with a computer that can't really do the job that it needs to do anyway. Or vision driven, you can raise the money necessary to buy the tool necessary to do the job necessary in an efficient fashion. Now that's one of our most common examples that we will use to help people see the difference between letting the vision set the budget instead of the budget set the vision. But this is totally true for people with chronic illness as well. You have to realize and adapt to there are things that others might not have to deal with, but you do, that are not, it's not a luxury for your hand to not be in total pain. Hopefully that's just normal. hopefully no one would go, oh, Mike, you really shouldn't spend that $15 on that pen grip,
Earbuds. Yep.
right? Or you really shouldn't have bought that car that's, especially equipped for people with disabilities. You should just, suffer and lay in the back seat. Like that's not reasonable. And so, sometimes adaptations, they cost money, but they actually free you up to do your job, to do your ministry in the best way that you possibly can. I need to get off my high horse here because I can preach on this one for, for a long
Yeah,
time. Save me, Mike. Save me.
100% with you on it. So going off of your thing of here's things that you learned in boot camp or in any other support raising training, another thing that we teach is face-to-face wins the race. Whether or not we use that phrase or not, the goal is, if possible, face-to-face appointments, ideally in person, could be over video call.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're doing your support raising, it's worth thinking through how you can make that work. I knew someone who was doing a support raising trip while on a broken ankle.
Mm-hmm.
And so having to ask about stairs, because stairs with crutches, I heard, is terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a temporary thing. So maybe someone's house is up a flight of stairs. Well, that's actually not that accessible unless they come meet you and help you up. Maybe just meet at a coffee shop, meet at a local park instead. Those are very simple ones. Restaurants usually are pretty accessible. For me, the two kinds of appointments I do, it's either have someone over for dinner and then I'll be on the couch for the rest of the appointment, or I do the appointment virtually. And my friends in Denver, they very much know about my condition and its impact. They're very willing to accommodate. I found most people aren't jerks, especially if you explain it. I have encountered people who are jerks outside of a support raising context. I'm not going to get into that at all. But most people, if you ask like, hey, could we instead do this? They say, yeah, that makes sense. Or maybe they can't do exactly what you asked, but well, what about this thing? And then you can brainstorm together. So as you're looking at, are you doing trips? How are you structuring your calls? What's your computer setup? Whatever that is, those are the kinds of things. Are any of these easy to do? Great. They don't have to adapt it. This one presents a challenge. Okay, great. How can you adapt it so you can do it?
Yeah, yeah. And so one of the things that, Mike, I know you and I aren't as lawyers, and one of the things we don't want to do is get into all the variations of the American Disabilities Act and how to force your employer to, blah blah blah. We're not going at that.
Nope.
We are saying though that it is a compassionate thing to engage with your ministry and what your duties are, and really kind of think about what are the necessary accommodations that missionaries, employees with disabilities are going to need to perform their job in the proper way while still achieving the same end result. So like the last thing we want somebody to do is listen to this podcast and, pull out the ADA and go start, calling lawyers and slapping around their missions organization. But there are some things that can be done as far as communication and adapting for work. Tell us about some of that, Mike.
Yeah, I think a person who really modeled it well was my direct supervisor now, and then the one before that. And so the one before that, he prefaced the conversation acknowledging this could be a really sensitive topic. And I want to talk about it. Like, I'm willing to enter the discomfort with you. So how can we still have professionalism and also accommodate your health?
Yeah.
And so at the time, I was using a green towel as lumbar support. And I still like the towel idea because I can make it thicker or thinner depending on what I need that day.
Okay.
But he said, maybe you could swap it out for a different color so it's less noticeable. So now I have a black towel for that. That was a very practical thing for that. The big one, I wouldn't say a big one, it was shoes. And we had talked in the earlier podcast, I can't wear shoes for very long. And so at my desk, I would just take my shoes off, but also dress shoes do not usually have good support. So like high-end running shoes, great support, but they don't look like dress shoes. So thinking like, maybe I could buy an all black running shoe that sort of looks like dress shoes, but it still doesn't. Like, how can we accommodate and accomplish both goals? But it's a conversation. And I fully affirm what Aaron said. We don't want to get into any legal stuff. And I think actually, if you came down really heavy handed, it's not going to go well. The fact that you work in a ministry that wants to bring people to Jesus means that your organization cares about people. And so your supervisor, your organization as a whole does care about you as a person.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true of other workplaces. And I've heard some horror stories from other chronically ill people who the employer is not even willing to do something simple like, let's just get a couch and stick it in your office and you can work from there. They're just
Right.
like, no,
Yeah.
we don't want to do that, even though no, you're actually required to. Let's just not get into that. Like, how do you
Yeah.
have that conversation? And then if you're a supervisor, I'd encourage you to have it knowing that you might accidentally say something
Yeah.
that you had no idea offends them, but each person's going to have different triggers. For me, it's anytime you say the phrase, have you tried?
Oh, okay.
That's just the one, like, you'd have no idea unless I told you. Now,
Right.
like, hey, have you considered? That's different. But have you tried? It's just kind of like they're telling me you have to do this, even if
Mhm.
they're not. So you have no idea what the landmines are, but being willing to say that and to ask for and receive forgiveness when that comes up. I
Yeah.
just appreciate when people are willing to do that, kind of like people appreciate my broken Spanish when I'm on a mission trip. Like, I'm trying.
Right. Give me a little grace here, man. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so that's a two-way street. Like we need to have that grace, but also, in some cases, people, particularly if you are struggling with a chronic illness, you might need to open that door. Mike, that's great that you had a supervisor that was willing to step into that with you. But you might, if you have a chronic illness, you might need to be the graceful one that schedules a time with your supervisor and say, "Hey, we need to discuss some good steps that might be possible as dealing with my chronic illness. I'd like to be better at my job. I'd like to be in less pain while I'm at my job, and I'd like to discuss that with you. And hopefully, yeah, Mike, like you said, these are people that are in the people business for the sake of the kingdom. Hopefully, that's an easy discussion. If that's not an easy discussion, then this is a little bit different. It's a very different situation, and that's the same thing. I've had just a handful of discussions with missionaries that were in organizations that didn't really care about them as people, and that had nothing to do with chronic illness or not. And that was just if that's a bad fit, that's a bad fit, regardless of chronic illness. But that's really a different dog we're not going to hunt today. Let's take a few seconds to mention an important resource that can be helpful for support raisers. CMM Press has published another great book that is not only for those who raise their personal support, but also they oversee teams or even an organization whose staff teams raises their own personal support. Scott Morton is a champion for biblically based ministry partnership development, so I highly recommend that you pick up a copy of his book called Blind Spots. It's available at cmmpress.org, where you can receive a 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast. All right, great. So keep us going, man. What else? What else have you been
Well,
thinking
I
about?
actually kind of wanted to hear from you. What adaptations have you and your wife used? Because obviously you're in a very different situation from me, and I'd love to hear it. I think our listeners probably would too.
Okay. All right. So my wife, Marky, for those that don't know, she has survived 4 brain surgeries. She also has an autoimmune disease called erythromelalgia. It's caused bone degradation. So yeah, we've multiple surgeries. In fact, in the last couple of weeks, she's been in and out of the hospital a couple of times. It's just really messed with her body over the past 15 plus years. And so in that, we were launching Exago Ministries, which does some like member care type coaching as well as some support raising coaching and things like that. And we just picked up early on she could not put a lot of energy into like practical everyday work with it. And yet she is value added. She prays with me. She prays her supporters with me. She lets me know. She kind of keeps track on some of our supporters, like social media. So like sometimes she's like, "Did you know so and so are having a baby?" And I'm like, "What? No, I pray for them. I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me." And so like there's just little things that she does. She goes out of her way to full on be my partner in the ministry that I do with Exago, and then of course in partnership with Support Raising Solutions. But yeah, she's not in the daily. She can't be in the daily. But there's just a lot of little things. Like for instance, previewing newsletters. I'm not a very good writer. She is. She had an English minor in college, and she was a school teacher. So I turn in my newsletter to her so that she can mark it all up so I can go back and fix it. Right. So there's just a number of ways that she has participated in doing the ministry with me in prayer and even some action, even though she can't do the daily. Another thing that she has done, despite her very long list of medical issues, we have actually discovered that in some cases, traveling is not that hard on her. She can go to the airport, get on an airplane, and in most cases, There are some places in the world that I'll never take her again because we've realized that was really bad on her health. But in many cases, she can come with me. And honestly, Mike, that means a lot to me. If I'm going to be on the road, I'm going to be training a missions conference or something else, and then I'm not just going to be gone for a day or two, but it's going to be a week or longer. We try and figure out so that somehow so that she can come with me. And I realize she might not be getting on stage. She's not as mouthy as I am, so she's not she's not usually the one on the microphone. But it ministers to my heart. It encourages me. I don't feel like I'm leaving her high and dry being sick and I'm on the other side of the country or the other side of the world. So she can't always go with me, but she does travel with me often enough that she brings her heart. She brings her head. She brings support. She engages with me when I'm kind of having a hard time processing. And so that's not all like tangible stuff that you would, fill out a key results area report to turn into anybody necessarily. And yet she is very much in the ministry of Exago with me and in the ministry that we get to do in partnership with SRS with me, even though, for all intents and purposes, to a lot of people, it might look like it's just me. But I'll tell you right now, I'm a package deal. I am very much a package deal, and she has my heart and vice versa. And so we do it together, even though, I'm probably a lot more visible, so to speak. Does that make sense, Mike?
It does. And it shows how individualized this is. Like, this is the way she wants to and is able to, and this is how it's supporting you. And what that got me thinking of is, even if two people have the exact same condition, like that dynamic in a marriage or in a ministry will be different. And so it's not like we can give this list or this cookie cutter approach. So like we mentioned before, this is a conversation, whether it's a supervisor or with leadership in your organization, with someone you're going to be able to talk about. Definitely include your spouse in that if you're married, because they live this. They know how this impacts them as well. And, we had talked in the other podcast about when your wife went grocery shopping and you knew that meant she wouldn't be able to have dinner with the family. So you don't want that to be the ministry gets the best of you and then you're curled up in a ball in pain when you get home. Right. That's probably not the correct answer for that. So how can you do both? But that's why I'm not going to tell you. I can give you ideas, but I'm not going to tell you what to do just because of how much variety in the situations there are. So.
Yeah. And I will say, though, if I can just speak to the people who are primary caregivers, so to speak. So I have learned to adapt and work myself in really different places, including hospitals. And I've done a lot of Zooms and even a webinar or two and different things like that in moments where she was not in crisis and I was able to find a quiet space. I've definitely led a webinar from a hospital more than once, and people don't even know it. I mean, the audience doesn't even know it because that's just how I've learned to adapt. And my team with Exago and the SRS team, they all get that there are times where I have to go, okay, I'm out. She's not doing good. And I won't be at that meeting, or I'm not going to lead that thing, or I step out. But that's not the norm. The norm is I learn to adjust where I can be fully present with her. But then she also realizes there's times where she's like, hey, I'm not in crisis. Go have your meeting. I'm like, are you sure? Yes, absolutely. I'm fine. I'll push the nurse button or I'll call you if I need something. And so I go down the hall and hide in a waiting room or a little office or something like that. So even I, as the primary caregiver, have learned to make adaptations for her chronic illness.
Yeah. Well, that having meetings in hospitals, I've taught classes because I teach people support raising and coach them from couches. And I had participants say, it was a little odd for about 10 minutes and then you just get used to it. Yep. And then, here's the class. We're doing activities most of the time. It kind of doesn't matter that I'm laying on a couch for it. So another adaptation that works for me, and I understand this might not be, not everyone is going to be in this position. So I am at our office and am a manager, and there's some stuff that I know how to do, but I physically can't. Often formulas in Excel, it would require a lot more hands, and it's just really clunky to do by voice. But what I can do is bring a teammate in, so it's just the two of us in a meeting. We're basically borrowing my brain and their hands, and then they're learning how to do it, and so it's It's elevating their knowledge as a person, and it doesn't flare my pain in the process. So like I said, not everyone's going to have situations like that, but figured I'd share it in case this does apply to you and you find it helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Good one. Good one. All right. So, hey, there's this uncomfortable conversation that I think we need to have too. So here we are talking about chronic illness and how to adapt, but just reality is there aren't always adaptations. And so I've been blessed, Mike, with really kind of exceptional physical health. I'm very blessed, and my wife, unfortunately, hasn't been blessed. But if I can just use an example from my own life first, so I really, really love sports and played some college baseball and almost played some college basketball. I didn't for ministry purposes. I realized I couldn't do the ministry job I was being offered and play college basketball. It was a really hard decision. I know it sounds like that's easy, but at the time, that was a really big decision that I turned down playing college basketball. But Mike, I couldn't have played in the NBA. I really don't think I could have played in the NBA. I was a decent shooter. I wasn't a great shooter. I'm fast, but I'm not like world class fast. I could dunk, but I'm only not quite 6 feet tall. So it wasn't like I was going to like go flying through the lane and dunk on people. My point is this: as much as I loved basketball and I wanted to play in the NBA, the reality is I just couldn't. Like physically, that wasn't going to be on the table for me, despite my heart and desire and passion for the game. I just wasn't going to be able to do it. Now that's not a perfect example, but I gotta think that for some people that have a chronic illness and they're trying to think about adaptations, there's probably some jobs, some duties, some things that others might be able to do for the sake of the kingdom of God that because of their chronic illness, they just can't do. And that might really hurt their heart. And they also might want to be trying to make it work, even though it might just not work. What do you say to those people?
Oh, I mean, that's a big one, especially if it's a role that you desire. So, I have had no desire to be a major gift philanthropy officer, and also physically can't. That's a lot of travel. You're meeting with these donors usually multiple times. You're stewarding that relationship well. Or there's a Denver-based ministry that does evangelization through a lot of hiking and backpacking trips because
Mm-hmm.
that's the culture here. And so you can show the beauty of God's creation and evangelize through that. Well, I don't know if you knew this, Aaron, but most mountains are not wheelchair accessible.
Get out.
So you can't really do that. And even if it
Yeah.
was wheelchair, like I still can't sit for all that long. So, but I didn't really have the desire to do that. But it would be really nice to be able to teach our summer training classes in person, for
Yeah.
me, and not have to do my sections remotely.
Yeah.
So I think acknowledging there is a loss and being able to mourn that loss, like grieve over it. Like
Mm.
it is, there's nothing wrong with saying, Lord, I desire this. And I know that the situation I'm in right now, whether or not it changes, but right now I can't. And it's okay to mourn that. Or if you had a condition that changed, I can't do things I used to do. The
Mm-hmm.
old me, in a sense, has died. It's no longer here. And
Yeah.
how can I get with that change of identity? And that's a theme in a lot of these chronic illness groups that I've talked about. We've talked about like this 4 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
Was how do you cope with that grieving process?
Yeah.
And it isn't easy. I think an advantage that those of us listening on the call have is you know Jesus. You can bring this to him. He can take your tears. He wept at the tomb of Lazarus. He did not despise our emotions. He did not say that we should get rid of them. He wants us to bring those into relationship with him and let him speak into it, and sometimes to weep with us.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I did not expect to get this emotional about this point. Wow. Um, yeah,
It's hard.
I, yeah, it's
It
hard.
really is hard.
I'd still say most things can be, but there are some that aren't. And that's all I got. I don't have anything eloquent at this
Oh man,
point.
I'm sorry. I really am sorry. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, Marky can't go to the mountains like probably ever again. It causes her tumor to swell, which puts pressure against her cerebellum in such a way that she can't function. I mean, basically, it's a migraine that will not stop until she's out of the mountains. And so we had family that lived in Colorado Springs. We tried to go visit them a few years ago. We were going to stay for like 4 or 5 days. I think we stayed for 2.5 because her migraine was non-stop, and so we left, and then it dissipated. And actually, just recently, Support Raising Solutions decided that it's going to do a support raising leaders conference in the future. There's one upcoming here. And at the time we're recording this, we haven't had the 2021 SRLC yet, but there's a plan to do one probably in Colorado, the next one. And I'm just like, and not that it's like the biggest thing in the world, but that takes about a week of my time because I usually help MC that and stuff like that. And just Mike, the reality is Marky's not going to be able to come to that. She likes to come to stuff with me, but it's in the mountains. And so there's a sense of loss there. There's a sense of, oh, why did that have to be scheduled there? Which it's fine. Like, we can't plan the whole conference around us, right? Like, we just got to roll with it. But that's going to be a time where she can't come. She can't participate. And there is a sense of loss there. And that's just like a conference. I can't imagine how much harder that would be if someone really did have a desire to do, like you were using an example of like a major gifts officer. Like, if that's something they really love to do and they wanted to do, and then they just couldn't, they couldn't do it because they can't handle that amount of travel and adaptation. And so, Jesus meets us in that place. Jesus meets us in that sense of loss. And I believe he gives us grace to think about that and to process that and to give that to him. But that doesn't mean it's an easy thing, does it, Mike?
No. Well, what I'm reminded of, and I don't know how dated this will be by the time this airs, but my wife was listening to America's Got Talent auditions, and her stage name is Nightbird. I wouldn't just say cancer survivor. She actively still has cancer, singing and performing, and she's just very, very real and raw about all. Like, God meets you on the bathroom floor. As you're crying, as you're puking, as you're whatever, like, and just seeing that, like, our God is one who did not despise that. Like, he was born in a feeding trough for animals. Like, we can glorify, like, oh, in a manger, that's so cute. No, it's not. And he did not despise that. He wasn't born in a palace. So he can meet us in that. Like, our messiness is not a thing we have to make perfect before we present ourselves to Jesus. Like, all of us theologically would say, yes, I believe that. But do you believe that when it's like your health, your emotions, stuff like that? Like, I don't have to make myself look presentable before I pray about it. I recently, and I'm not going to get into the details, had a lot of rage at an airline employee who denied a disability accommodation he was required by law to provide. And a lot of emotions came up from that, and initially it was rage at a level I didn't know I had. And I remember going into prayer like, maybe I should get a handle on this. And the sense I got immediately was Jesus saying, I can handle your rage. And like, all right, Lord, well, let me tell you. And I did. So, and he can handle it.
Yeah. Which I know that we intend to record another podcast in the near future, just to kind of talk about dealing with challenges and negative comments and other people and stuff like that, even while support raising. But praise the Lord for that. And yeah, we'll pick up that thread in another episode. But for today, I think we probably need to wrap up. And Mike, there's a lot to deal with. And when people, we're talking about adaptation, one of the things I think I've really heard you say here is that you might not be able to figure it out all at once, but learn as you go. And you might have to try some different things. You might have to tweak some different things as you are raising support and as you're learning to raise support as somebody with a chronic illness. And even later on, once you're fully funded, you're going to, how you do your job. There are going to be things that need to be solved, but that doesn't mean that, well, sorry, there's not an easy adaptation here, so that you're not called to ministry, quit. That's not what we're saying at all. In fact, the opposite. We're saying lean into God, lean into how he wants you to adapt so that you can raise your support, so you can do the kingdom work that he has called you to. So, Mike, my friend, as you know, I like to give the guests the final word. So as we wrap up this episode, what's a truth bomb you want to drop on us before we close?
I mean, I just want to reiterate what you just said, that you can learn as you go. You can tweak. You do not have to figure it all out at once. And I want that to take the pressure off of you. It's not like you try one thing and it didn't work and then everything failed. No, it's a learning thing. Or you tried it and it did work. Amazing. Praise God. Just like the other episode in the series, you are not alone in this. There are others in your life who want to support you. And of course, God wants to be with you in this.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike, for joining us on the SRS podcast. Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.